Hello, everybody, and welcome to Heartlight Vedic Astrology. Today, I was going to talk about Vedic Astrology or Jyotish analysis for the full moon coming up. This coming, I think, Tuesday, Purnima, as it's known as in Sanskrit, on the 23rd of April, 2024. And it seemed like the overall theme of this moment in time was it's a fragile moment. So let's go ahead and see what's going on. Note beforehand, the information presented here is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical, financial, professional, or life advice of any kind. If you are in need, please contact an appropriate professional for support. And then you might take a moment or two to read the rest of this disclaimer. Okay, so if you're new to Vedic astrology, Jyotish, or my videos, all of my teaching videos on the subject are my concepts playlist. And wherever you see a double asterisk in one of my talks, that means there's a teaching video on that subject if you'd like to learn more about that concept. Also, I have different playlists that are growing. Sorry. I've been drinking for a while here and my throat's still dry, so hopefully we'll move through this. And you won't have to hear that throughout the talk. Okay. So anyway, I was saying I have different playlists that are growing. So again, if you're learning, you might check out these different playlists depending on what you're trying to learn. So one is planets or grahas playlist. So especially if you're looking for symbolism of each planet and different sorts of concepts related to planets, I would look there. I also have a houses or bhavas playlist. I've done most of the houses by now, but I've got a few more to do. And if you're starting out, I would start with the lugna, also known as the ascendant, rising sign, or first house, that video. And then I have a playlist of yogas or planetary combinations that you can check out. And then the other thing is that if you're looking for birth charts, I published recently in the last week or two a birth chart archive list 2024 video. And in that video, what I do is I list all the birth charts that I've analyzed and then the video that you can find them in. And I've organized that by different people, famous people. I've analyzed their birth charts at different places like countries and cities, and also like important moments in time. So if you want to look at birth charts, I would look at that video to find out where they are because it's not always evident, obvious from the titles of my videos. Like I do usually 2 or 3 birth chart analysis type things in my monthly videos, but you would never know that unless you watch the video. Or you can look in the description box. I list the birth charts that I've analyzed in the description box. That's helpful too. Okay, so other videos that you might want to watch to get more out of this video, because it's an interpretation video and I incorporate a lot of different concepts. So the first one is North, South, and East Indian style charts. I do cover Western style charts in that video, but it's not part of the title. Introduction to navigating a birth chart. Introduction of the constellations or rashis. Constellation or rashi categories. Planetary aspects. Natural benefic and malefic planets or grahas. Chidra grahas or planets of vulnerability. Planet retrogression or vakri. Planetary exaltation and debilitation, or nicha, uccha nicha. Then I have nicha bhanga, breaking planet debilitation. Purva Bhadrapada, planet breaking house. Nakshatras, these are the lunar mansions. And then for this talk, parivartana yoga, exchange of houses, and pravraja yoga, life focus combination, you can see will be quite prominent. All right, so let's get into it though. All right, so this is a chart for full moon Purnima on 23rd April 2024. And this moment in time is the 23rd April. Yeah, so 19:49 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's the time zone I live in. Day Lord at this moment, the Day Lord is Mars, and the Hora Lord is Jupiter. So just from that, we're starting to get some planetary energies. Mars is a leadership planet. It can be quite like aggressive. It's considered to be like the commander in chief, or like in a company, it would be the CEO. So something very hands-on leadership. Yeah, in the trenches, on the front lines type of leadership. And then Jupiter is about expansion. The thing that was Jupiter happens to be in a nakshatra called Krittika at this moment, and Krittika is symbolized by Kartikeya, who is the great chief of the celestial army. So actually, we're already getting 2 doses here of military or kind of yeah, military energy mostly. The thing that was at Jupiter is in Krittika nakshatra, and Krittika nakshatra is a dual nakshatra. So it does have this sort of like, victorious leadership, military energy, but it also has with it, which a lot of people forget about, is that it has this kind of foster care, foster mother, nurturing type energy. Okay. So, because Kartikeya, the celestial commander in chief of the army, was raised by different foster mothers. Okay. So, there is this sense of like nurturing here, despite both of these planets, Mars and Jupiter, having this kind of military or leadership energy. Um, and again, that's mostly because of the nakshatra that Jupiter's in. Okay. So expanding leadership, you could say. Jupiter is a planet of expansion. It is also a planet that represents things like law and justice. So um, yeah, we'll see how that plays out. In the Dasha period, the Dasha is the planetary period, is Rahu, Jupiter, Mars, Jupiter. So we're getting more Jupiter Mars energy. And Rahu is about, a symbol that it's the north node of the moon, and it symbolizes things like ambition, but there's also this sort of like hidden or unexpected quality to Rahu. So there's a sort of like protection from unstable enemies. And the reason why I put enemies here is because Mars is the planet that symbolizes enemies. And if you know your houses, you'll see in this chart, just to start off with, Mars, the planet symbolizing enemies, is in the sixth house, which is the house of enemies. And you can see there are 4 planets there in the sixth house, which creates a pravraja yoga, or a planetary combination, giving a life focus. Yeah. So, yeah. So it's, we're already seeing several layers of it, and we haven't even really dug into the chart yet. So then this Dasha period is going to be switching. So we're going to be moving away from this Mars energy, and we're just going to Rahu, Jupiter, Rahu on the 20th of May. So it looks like for a good, month here, we're definitely in this Rahu, Jupiter energy, but we're sort of trading out the Mars energy for Rahu, so more kind of ambition, but maybe unexpected hidden qualities, like a little bit more mysterious. But things might cool down, we'll see. But again, we're just talking about this particular moment in time. Um, so when I look at Rahu, Jupiter, Rahu, I see effort towards diplomacy and also losing that kind of Martian edge, that kind of, because Mars can be erratic, it can be violent, it can be angry, um, that sort of thing. So hopefully that means taking the edge off, in a month or so. Now, the Lagna Nakshatra, the Lagna is the first house of the chart, also known as the ascendant rising sign. And this is a North Indian style chart. And to get to the first house, you go to this diamond at the top center here, where you can see the moon and the ascendant, MOAS. And then to find the different houses in North Indian style charts, you count backwards. So if you go up and to the left from the moon, you'll get to the second house. And if you keep going counterclockwise, you'll go third, fourth, fifth, that sort of thing. Okay. So anyway, the Lagna the nakshatra is a lunar mansion. Every night the moon changes nakshatras, so we get different energies coming through the moon. And so the nakshatra here, the rising sign nakshatra, is Swati. Swati is symbolized by new grown grass blowing in the wind. So there's a lot of restlessness here and nervousness here. I typically see when I have somebody with Swati placements, they can have a lot, quite a bit, if not a lot, of nervousness, anxiety, restlessness. You can almost kind of see them like a quaking leaf, some of them. Yeah. The other thing is that the moon nakshatra, you can see moon and the ascendant are very close to each other. The moon nakshatra is also in Swati. Now, the moon represents things like the public, the mind, emotions. So we've got nervous public, nervous mind, emotions. Okay. So, and then you can see like maybe with this Mars Jupiter energy revving up here, it's causing a bit of unrest in the public, in the mind, and the emotions. So again, you can read this in different ways. You can read this as like a potentially a collective energy chart, or you could read this as like an individual chart. So I kind of go back and forth, to try to be inclusive. But sometimes the energy of the chart kind of starts driving me in one direction more than the other. Okay, so anyway, let's start at the lugna, top of the chart, and we work our way around typically. So the lugna here is a Libra or Tula rising sign. You can see that little 7 in the corner there. 7 represents the 7th zodiac sign or constellation of the zodiac. Libra is a movable air sign or chara vayu in Sanskrit. So movable means a lot of activity, and air means a lot of mental activity. So already you're getting confluence. We have Swati twice, the moon is here, and then we have it in a movable air sign. So you can see there's a lot of, internal restlessness, nervousness going on. And now this first house is aspected by an exalted sun. The sun is in the 7th house in Aries where it's exalted. So we have a very strong sun. Sun is on Ashwini. Ashwini is a nakshatra symbolized by the Kumara twins, who are the celestial healers, and they ride around on horses. So there's a sort of rescuing energy that's coming in with the sun, and the sun can symbolize things like father, authority, government. Sun is also a fiery planet such as Mars. So it's a action-oriented planet. And the sun happens to be in a fire sign, so a fire planet in the fire sign. This is a lot of fire here in the 7th house of partnerships and independent business. So there's some sort of initiative we can see here. Because again, the sun and Mars are both not only fire planets, but leadership planets. Jupiter, as I mentioned, is in Krittika. Uh, so Jupiter is already a dual planet and it's in a dual nakshatra. So there's this wavering going on. Do we fight or do we make amends? That sort of thing. And then we have Mars here, and Mars, you can see in the 6th house, as I mentioned, Mars is in the 1st degree of the 6th house here in Pisces. So Mars is, it's any planet that's in the 1st or last degree of any constellation is called Sundi. And Sundi basically indicates that a planet is unstable because it's switching energies as it's moving constellations. So Mars is unstable, and Mars is already not, a particularly stable planet. Luckily though, Mars, well, it's a mixed bag here in this 6th house, these 4 planets I've circled here. Mercury's here retrograde, debilitated, and is it combusted? No, it's not combusted, it came out of combustion. But Mercury with the strength from retrograde, but debilitation, weakness from debilitations, we can say Mercury's in a exaggerated state, and it's both strong and weak. So, and Mercury's also a dual planet in a dual sign. So, it's sort of like this wavering decision making that's going on here. What do we think? What do we do? Then there's Rahu here, the north node of the moon, and that's ambition. So there's some drive here into the 6th house. Now, the 6th house not only represents enemies, but it represents like daily activities. And then we have Venus here. Luckily, Venus is here, and Venus is exalted in Pisces. So right now, and Venus is a very diplomatic planet. It's a very gracious planet. It's a very social planet, compassionate planet. So Venus right now is kind of holding this whole 6th house together. But as you notice, Venus is also Sundi because it's in the last degree of Pisces. So we got Venus moving out, which is again bringing some grace to this situation. And Mars is moving in, and Mars is again, boisterous, rebellious, So you can see that the energy of the 6th house is switching. It's like literally at the moment of this Purnima. That's part of why I said this is a fairly fragile moment. Okay. So what else? Oh, and then Mars, the nakshatra Mars is in. Mars is in the nakshatra Purva Bhadrapada. Purva Bhadrapada is symbolized by the front legs of a funeral pyre. So there's a lot of destructive energy associated with that nakshatra, like, literally something burning. The deity associated with that nakshatra is a form of Rudra, who's a storm god. So you can just imagine like there's some kind of stormy, energy moving into the 6th house as this very like, gracious, lovely, friendly energy is kind of moving out. Okay. So when we put all this together, so far, if we're still kind of looking at the first house, but we're seeing, where things are kind of coming from. Um, we've got these two fire planets on the moon. We've got Jupiter, which even though it's not a fire planet, it's basically in a dual nakshatra that includes a lot of fire, like the Krittika. So there's a lot of, nervousness, but also potentially, I would say, courage that's being built up here, in terms of like, what do we do? What do we say? Because that's all this confusion here going on, switcheroo going on in the sixth house. So the mind and emotions are spinning, restless, a lot of fire, potentially military energy. We've seen several times aggression, anger. Some people are going to be rescuing, some people are going to be fighting, protecting, leading, enthusiasm here, legal issues, alliances, because again, Jupiter and Sun are in the seventh house of partnerships. The other thing is that you see this double-sided red arrow. Jupiter, once Mars moves into Pisces, you have a parivartana, exchange of houses between Jupiter and Mars. So actually, you can almost kind of consider Jupiter in the sixth house as well. So you have 5 planets there. And then you have Mars, Sun, and Jupiter in the seventh house. So you've got the two leadership fire planets in Aries, I mean, theoretically. Mars is in its own sign, super powerful. Sun is exalted. And we've got a lot of force, a lot of might, a lot of direction here in the seventh house. So collectively, this is all about building, military alliances, government alliances. And at the time of this recording, we have a lot going on. Like we have a potential military escalation going on in the Middle East, for example. So I think, just even through the news and stuff, people are on edge because of that. If this was just an individual's birth chart instead of a collective birth chart, the native of this chart would be, I think, fairly nervous, restless, but the partner would be like really stepping into their power in a huge way. So it's like, even though there's some, and there might actually be potentially, there could be some fighting here, but I think the fighting would be like almost like the partner, the seventh house person is rescuing or attempting to contain or control, in a positive way, like control in terms of help diffuse, yeah. The native here, because the native is clearly much more nervous and restless than the partner. The partner is like ready to like stand up and fight and take a stand and all this kind of stuff and step in. But the partner, the lugna person with the moon and the Swati and everything isn't quite there yet. Let's put it that way. All right, so the lugnatia of this chart is Venus, because Venus rules Libra, and Venus is this exalted Sunday Venus in the sixth house, and it's in Revati nakshatra. So again, right now Venus is holding this whole sixth house together. And then luckily, in a way, because we have the parivartana between Mars and Jupiter, Jupiter will now step in to kind of hold the sixth house together for, I think it's about a week, 10 days. And then Jupiter's moving out of Aries, so then we're going to lose that parivartana. Okay, so at least for now, there's some containment here, or smoothing of the edges of the sixth house. And then Revati nakshatra, it's the last nakshatra, it's the last constellation, so there's this kind of endings is associated with this. The other thing is that traveling, hospitality, that sort of thing. And then the other thing to note is that again, like Venus is the ruler of the native here, the lugna, and then Mars is the ruler of the seventh house. So again, this is where you can kind of see like there's some, fighting here, but some attempt to like hold things together before things completely go off the rails. Yeah. So again, whether it's on an individual basis or a kind of collective basis. And the sixth house also represents things like acute illness and acute, incidents or events, that sort of thing. But the thing is, Venus here is also the lord of the eighth house, which is more about chronic issues. So some of what's trying to be resolved here is there's definitely a flare up, current flare up. This is also about a long-standing issue. This isn't like brand new, whatever is going on here between, like, again, if this is a couple or collectively, right? Like things in the Middle East. I mean, this is nothing new, unfortunately, right? Okay, so again, there's an attempt. So what Venus is trying to do, there's an attempt to contain enemies diplomatically. But, as Venus is slipping out of Pisces, Venus is also slipping out of the grip. So, and the other thing is Venus is like the practical advisor of, different planets here. So there's this different sort of practical diplomatic things that are trying to be done here, initiatives that are being made here to, again, contain the situation before it blows up completely. The other thing to know about this chart is that the chidra grahas, so chidra grahas are planets that are kind of points of vulnerability. You can think of like an Achilles heel. Well, Mars twice over and Mercury twice over. So you can see that in like medically when we talk about chidra grahas, literally somebody could like be having surgery or something like that. So if this is a person, this might be somebody who is having like abdominal surgery because the sixth house represents like especially the mid, you know. Um, and so it might be a little bit precarious, but I would say again, if this is somebody, you'd have to look at their amshas and stuff to, double check. But, even though things are maybe a little bit precarious, it looks like things would go well overall, because you have Venus there, even though it's sliding out of Pisces, but then you also have potentially Jupiter there. So you have two benefic planets in the sixth house, protecting the situation. The thing, though, is that Venus is going combust on I believe it's the 28th of April, and Jupiter is going combust on the 3rd of May. So within a couple weeks, a week or two, maybe not even 2 weeks, like within 10 days or so, both of those benefic planets are going to be combust, meaning that they're eclipsed because they're so close to the sun. And so they won't be able to do what they normally do, which is like, smooth things over and build bridges. So for right now, um, even though it's a precarious, fragile moment, it looks like things are being held together. But the moments will change, but at least for now, things are okay. So I mentioned there's a pravraja yoga with the 4 planets that I've circled. There's also a shasha yoga. That's that Saturn in its own sign in the 5th house. A shasha yoga is a Raj yoga, so it gives power. And the 5th house is about children. It's about creativity. It's also about advisement, and it's also about like the intellect, like the forefront of the mind. So Saturn in its own house, well, its own house, this particular own house is Aquarius, which is a fixed air sign. So this is about long-standing kind of paradigms of thought. And the thing is, Saturn happens to be in a nakshatra of Purva Bhadrapada, similar to Mars, except that it's on the Aquarius side instead of the Pisces side. So again, the front 2 legs of a funeral pyre. So part of this is about, there's, even though Saturn is very strong because it's in its own sign, it's in a pretty virulent nakshatra. And, the symbol of a funeral pyre is, cremation. It's about death and release and transformation. But Saturn is also a planet that symbolizes death. So, and chronic illness and things like that, obstacles, delays. And so you can see this Saturn is aspecting 3 houses away into the 7th house. So, um, that's part of what the 7th house, person or collective is being advised to do is it might be time to, end things, hopefully diplomatically. But it looks like there's energy mounting to contain and end the situation. Yeah. So, so again, with all of this, we have a focus on vulnerability, piercing, and also hostile words, decisions, and actions. Potentially, because especially when Venus moves out, you'll still have Jupiter there for a bit until May 3rd, but Mars and Mercury and Rahu will be there um, beyond that. I mean, Jupiter will still be in there, but Jupiter will be combust. So on a deeper level, you might see more compassion, or you might see hidden compassion, like people won't be outwardly compassionate, or they won't be speaking as much because Jupiter represents like a oration. Um, and typically, Venus and Jupiter are both very kind planets, so you won't necessarily see so much of that in the external world. But at least Jupiter will be there, on a deeper level. So maybe there's some development. This could be like, since Jupiter also symbolizes spirituality, this might be that somebody starts um, like a new spiritual practice, because there's so much external kind of chaos potentially, or at least the threat of it. And the nervousness is spiking here. So it might drive somebody closer or deeper into their spiritual practice, into a spiritual practice. Yeah. So let's move on to the next house. So the second house, house lord is this, Sunday Mars. It aspects its own sign when you move when you swap Mars and Jupiter in the parivartana. And then it's also aspected by Jupiter and Saturn. See Mars, you can think of Mars, Jupiter, Saturn here. And again, Mars and Saturn and Purva Bhadrapada and Jupiter's in Krittika. So this is like a lot of like very strong talk, potentially military again, potentially legal, almost like cease and desist orders, like, um, like we're serious, like like when, like I think of like mothers and parents and stuff like that. Like this is my I'm serious voice. This is not like, let's be chummy and let's try. This is like, no, we're serious. Like, you better, knock it off or step back or step down, because this is getting serious. So very powerful words here: call to action, military, attempt to warn or protect, because we still have that, foster energy, nurturing energy coming through Jupiter. I mean, Jupiter is doing both, right? It's like, if we need to step in, we will, but we're hoping this will de-escalate before it blows up. Also like continuous discussion here, a lot of talking. And then the second house also represents like destroying and protecting assets. Well, assets, but because we have both the protecting part coming through Jupiter and preservation through Saturn, but Mars is there, ready to like, okay, if you push me far enough, this is where things are going to go. So, yeah. Then the third house here, we have the third lord is Jupiter aspecting its own. That's kind of nice. So, um, there's protection here, there's courage here. And that also means there's going to be a lot of writing, news publishing, because the third house is all about nonverbal communication, and Jupiter is also about education and philosophy and publishing. So, protecting and arguing philosophies. It's also going to be two sides of the story, because it's Jupiter's a dual planet and a dual sign. So, every story has two sides, right? So there's going to be a lot coming out, like in the news, such as there is right now with this Middle East situation going on. Then the fourth house lord is Saturn, aspected by Ketu and Hasta. Ketu is the south node of the moon. It's a very erratic planet. It's kind of like Mars, but even more kind of unexpected, unpredictable, hidden, sudden kind of energy. And Hasta is a nakshatra that's symbolized by a hand. So with K2, it can either be like a sudden grab or a sudden release. And you don't quite know which way it's going to go. But Saturn and K2 both are planets of separation. And the fourth house represents home. It represents mother. It represents family line. It represents spiritual lineage, property, education, happiness, a lot of things. So, again, with Saturn being a planet representing death, potentially destruction, in a nakshatra representing the same, and then Q2 either grabbing or releasing. There's a lot of churn going on in the fourth house, and all these things that this represents. So again, in the Middle East, right now, all these things I'm sure are on the line for a lot of people there. Yeah. Then the fifth house, I've been talking about the Saturn, so very strong counsel, but with Saturn, this is like potentially about burning bridges, or at least a willingness to burn bridges, to end a paradigm. And then the fifth house also represents the upper GI. So there could be some motility problems. This might be like if this is a person's chart, especially with the fifth and sixth house, a challenge as much as it is. And then even the seventh house, that's all GI issues. So this could be somebody with like IBS, motility issues here. Um, yeah. So I think this stress, this nervousness, because IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, typically it's kind of like a diagnosis by default. When they've checked everything else and nothing pops up, they're like, "Oh, you have IBS," typically. Um, and so it's sort of a catch-all at the end of a trial at diagnosis. And so a lot of IBS people with, quote unquote IBS flare up when they're stressed out. And there's sort of a kind of a profile of an IBS patient who's typically like a type A personality, always kind of very detail oriented, very fastidious, who's also very nervous type and very like performance oriented. Like if they don't get straight A's, it really stresses them out, and that sort of thing. That kind of personality. So you could see this whole picture as like somebody with fairly serious, I would say, GI issues here, that are related to nervousness and anxiety. Then the sixth house here, well, I've been talking about that. So the Lord is Jupiter. It's conjoined with the Sun, Mars, debilitated. So Mars is, exaggerated, retrograde, nicha, bhanga, Mercury. So that's kind of nice about Mercury, because Mercury is debilitated in Pisces, but you have Venus there so at least for a few more hours here. Mercury will be nicha bhanga, which means it'll, the planet that's exalted in the sign that Mercury's in, which is Venus, helps to lift up that Mercury or debilitated planet out of its nicha position, its debilitation position. It can only do so much, but it's helpful. We'll take it, right? So we'll take it. So so again, more exaggeration of Mercury. So we have exaggerated Mars, exaggerated Mercury, Rahu, which is a wild card. You have Sunday Venus, who's slipping out of there, trying to do what it can to like contain the situation. Um, and then, the Jupiter through parivartana. So there's like a shift in diplomacy, I would say, towards more aggression. Um, and there's an unstable or unexpected words and actions because Mars is actions, Mercury's words. There's ambition here, but it's kind of like, again, like a glove, the gloves are off. Like, we're not going to be polite anymore. We really need to like get to the, bottom of this and just kind of stop this. Like, you know what I mean? So, yeah, so kind of more of the same energy. So let's move on. So this next slide, the stuff on the left is all the same, but I've got my notes here on the other houses that we haven't covered yet. So the seventh house, well, I've been talking about the seventh house Lord is Mars, conjoined with Jupiter's Sun. Uh, Mars, when it's in Aries, it's going to be in its own sign. But it's still sunny, so there's still some instability here with the seventh house. So potentially spouse, because that's what the seventh house represents, or spouse like partner, business partners, independent business, that sort of thing. And then we have a moon aspected here, which the moon is in Swati. So even though the partner or partners or business or whatever has more, I would say more strength, more courage, there's still nervousness on the partner side as well. It may not be as obvious because when you have Sun exalted and Mars Swa in Aries, that's going to be somebody who on the surface just seems like bulletproof. But you can see, Moon is still in Swati. They're still in the mind, in the emotions. There's still nervousness, but they have nerves of steel, but they're still, they're not impervious, impenetrable. So again, large leadership initiative here, powerful with the two leadership fire planets here in a fire sign. This is also about garnering public support. Rescue, some kind of rescue mission you could see here. And also a tension between protecting self and unexpected losses. Why did I put that there? Oh, because of the way that Mars and Jupiter are switching back and forth with the parivartana, because there is this sort of like protective energy, but we're trying to protect the self without like again letting things get too far out of hand and explode, where it just like it's a knockdown drag out fight and then both sides lose, that sort of thing. And then there can also definitely be legal matters here because when you get Jupiter and Mars together, that, Jupiter is justice and law, and Mars is about fighting. Jupiter is about oration, Mars is about fighting. And so, fighting with words and philosophies, that sort of thing. And then again, you have Mars and Jupiter in the sixth house of legal matters. So, again, if we're talking collective energy, this is about international law, like the UN type stuff that's going on. Then the eighth house here, the eighth house lord is Venus. This house is aspected by Ketu. So, there's a lot of swirling in the mind. What do we hold on to? What do we let go of? And yeah, so they're going to be long lasting losses. This isn't going to be like, what do we let go of? And then we can come back to it in a month because the eighth house is about, kind of long lasting consequences here. And the eighth house also represents deep psychology. So there's really a deep concern over priorities, prioritizing stuff. What do we focus on, when there's any sort of crisis moment? It's like, your mind is swirling typically, and so it's even harder to figure out in a brief moment. Although, unless some people have a brilliant moment of clarity, which is nice, but it's like, what do we prioritize? It's almost like if the house is burning down, what are the whatever two or three things you grab? They're of highest priority before you like leave, if you have that time or a chance to do that. It's the same sort of thing. Like, what are we really about here? What are we prioritizing? Um, and there's going to be some, again, a deep psychology. Um, uh, you know, uh, K2's coming from the 12th house, so Venus has gone to 6th house. And so, all the energy in the 8th house is basically on the 6-12 axis, 6th house being overt enemies, and the 12th house can indicate hidden enemies. So it's kind of like, more of the same, really. Then the 9th house here, this is pretty exaggerated because the Lord is an exaggerated Mercury, and it's aspected by an exaggerated Mars. So instability in leadership, government, religion, father, teachers, what's that song? That's kind of spiritual community, higher education, crisis of faith. I mean, all of these things right now are getting pushed. Like I was reading yesterday about how all the universities, a lot of the universities in the United States, like just the students aren't even going to class. Like they're all protesting all day long and causing a ruckus. Which is their right to do, but some people don't want to participate in that. They just want to go to class and, you know, take their exams and finish the semester. So anyway, it's causing a lot of instability in all these realms. And then you have the 10th house. The 10th of Lord is Moon, so in Swati, aspected by Mars and Jupiter. So again, the Moon representing the public and the mind. This is kind of like public management of news and law and public perception. That's what's going on the daily here. And then the 11th house, the 11th house lord is this exalted sun. This house is aspected by Saturn and Jupiter. And this 11th house represents like clubs, group, society. And it's ruled in this chart. It's ruled by Leo. Leo is a stage, so there's like public stage groups defending district. So this is all the protesting that's going on, in the streets, on campus, in the middle, middle of whatever's going on. People are not being quiet right now. It's not like they're, at home in their office or whatever, typing a letter to somebody. It's like, they're people are literally in each other's faces, like, yelling and screaming and that sort of thing. So, yeah, then the 12th house Lord is exaggerated Mercury. Luckily, though, Mercury is aspecting its own sign, so that'll, give a little bit of protection, kind of the way that Venus and Jupiter are protecting the 6th house. So, we'll take it, right? I mean, because this is, a fairly serious, this is serious potential, I would say. Things are heating up. Um, and you have this K2 there, and then it's also aspected by, besides Mercury, Mars, Venus, Jupiter. So this is about like loss of property, relationships, communications, travel, all these things that the planets represent. I mean, we basically have one, two, three, four, 5 planets in the 6th house, and you can kind of think of like 5 planets in the 12th house. So, and especially with Mercury there, you know, um, I've mentioned before that I've seen quite a few charts where when Mercury aspects its own sign, like we have Mercury in its own sign or aspecting its own sign, like Mercury and aspecting Virgo here. Mercury can be a very separatist planet, like a very kind of because usually with people who have an unbalanced Mercury, they can have a lot of mental energy and they trying to, reason everything out, which is fine in and of itself. But the thing is, sometimes they're so in their head, they get detached from their feelings and their emotions. And then the other thing here is we have another planet, K2, um, and which is another planet that can symbolize separation, more kind of abrupt, unexpected separation. And Venus is aspecting this house, but Venus is debilitated here. So again, it's almost like this being like very rational or maybe overly rational about the losses here. Um, being very logical and analytical rather than like in the feels, very emotional about, whatever is going on here. Although the moon is, top of the chart. So, but this could even be like loss of reason because Mercury represents reason. We're losing Mercury, to some extent, or some of Mercury's energy. So, yeah, it's tough moment here, and I can understand why, again, if this was a person that we were looking at here, why they're nervous and why oh, that's the other thing with the 12th house is that that can also be insomnia, which I would imagine with all these planets like jumbled up in the 12th house is that this person, again, if it was a person, is experiencing insomnia. So, yeah, this things, things are cooking for sure. Um, People are nervous for sure. And then, again, there's at least for the time being, it looks like, things are contained. So, uh, yeah, so let's look at the amshas, the subdivisional charts to see what else we see. Okay, so let's start off. Again, we're looking here now at the sub-zodiacs or amshas as they're called, and we're looking at relationships first, which obviously it's a heavy relationship chart. I mean, not only do we have all those planets in the 7th house, a lot of planets aspecting the 1st house, and then both the ruler of the 1st and 7th house are in the 6th house. But the 7th, Libra in general is for the natural zodiac, which is where, you can kind of consider it like a birth chart for all of humanity. The 7th house of partnerships is ruled by Libra. So again, like there are different layers of how you can see this is very, relationship dominated in many ways, this moment in time. So the current Dasha period, as I mentioned, this moment in time is Rahu, Jupiter, Mars, Jupiter. So I've circled those planets so we can kind of see where they land on these subcharts here. And then this Rahu, Jupiter, Mars, Jupiter period is switching to Rahu, Jupiter, Rahu on the 28th of May, 2024 for this moment in time. So basically, we can see where Rahu and Jupiter are at, and then we're going to have a little flare up here, little shift, dip, or we'll see with Mars. Okay. So this first chart here at the top is an Avamsha D9. This represents spouse and partnerships. So you can see Jupiter is not well placed, but it is Swa. It's in its own house, so there's some protection here of losses. But you can see there's a ton of planets here, kind of like the main chart of like we have Mercury, Moon, Rahu. So just with that and the Lugna here, Mercury and Moon are the two mind planets. Mercury is the analytical mind. Moon is the emotional mind. Rahu on its own can symbolize things like mental illness, anxiety, depression, any of those things. And we've got Rahu with the two mind planets. So, and Rahu, we're running Rahu right now. So there's a lot, again, we're getting a lot of anxiety. And even though it looked like in the main chart, the partner was like, the partner at least outwardly seems stronger. Both the partner, that Moon and Swati was on the 1-7 axis. Both people are feeling nervous. It's just they're expressing it differently. Like one person, like the main person, the Libra person is imploding, and the Aries person is exploding. They're both feeling stressed, but they're dealing with it in completely different ways. And then we kind of see basically the same thing here. So then, opposite in the 7th house and this amsa here, we have Sun, Ketu, Mars. We have somebody who's ready to fight. And then on top of that, so and we have Saturn debilitated in the 4th house of like happiness and home, aspecting the Lugna here. So basically, the Lugna has 1, 2, 3 planets in it. We have Mars and Sun aspecting it, and Saturn. So 6 planets in the Lugna here. This is an important chart. Okay. So, and again, we saw that. So, yeah. Okay. So a lot of so this leadership here is also about how do we lead mentally and emotionally? Like how do we steer the boat, away from the craggy edge, the sharp rocky, beach away from destruction, And we do that, by steering the boat mentally and emotionally, like for a lot of these things, And then there's ambition here. So there's an attempt here, like there's an attempt in the main chart to steer away from conflict. But you can see there is like a lot going on for both parties here, all parties here. And what's also interesting to me is that we have Venus exalted in the 3rd house here, and we have Jupiter or not exalted, Swa in its own signs in the 12th house. The two diplomatic planets are kind of in corners, like they're not touching, they're not touching this whole, conglomeration here in the on the 1-7 axis. And Venus is off in a corner; it doesn't touch this, and Jupiter doesn't touch this either. So it's kind of like this 9th house is almost like what's coming up for us when we have this Venus and Jupiter combus, where Venus and Jupiter are there, but they're on the sidelines. They're not really like main players in this, gaggle, this mix here. All right. So anyway, partner native is attempting to contain chaotic situation. Yes. And losses of things, some things will be protected. So that's a Jupiter swan, the 12th house. That'll protect some things, but more like inanimate things typically. And Jupiter can represent like people. So again, if we're talking more collectively, this may mean that some people, are seen as like collateral damage. I hate to use that phrase or wording, but that's that from the main chart, that K2 Mercury in its own sign. Like we've got to be cool and collected about this, and we've got to think about the higher good. And even if some people are lost in the process, it's for the greater good. So we're seeing that again here in this chart, that kind of idea. Um, and there could be also like Jupiter here in the 12th house. So another interpretation here, because again we have a dual planet in a dual sign. The 12th house also indicates places of isolation and long distance, like overseas. So this might be an attempt some people might be going overseas, like if they decided to jump into the fray, or maybe a spiritual retreat to like gain some clarity here. Like what do I do? What's mine to do in this, very complicated situation? Yeah, but you can see this ninth house is like, pretty wild. Then we have the Drakena D3 siblings, the next chart here. So luckily in this chart, all the grahas are well placed. So that's nice. So um what do I have here? So siblings, Rahu is in the 10th house of work. Um so siblings probably at this time are very work focused. Social, we have Jupiter Swa again, but it's in the 11th house being social here. And there's communication here in the 11th house. So this could be some of this like protesting stuff going on. In general, this would be a fairly outspoken person because you have not only Jupiter Swan, the 11th house of clubs, groups, and society, but Mars is in the second house of um, oral speaking, oral speech. So this could be again protesting that Mars, that kind of rebellious energy. The other thing is that what else was I going to say? This person is also probably fairly religious. But there might be a break with authority or government here because you have the Lugnatia here is Saturn, and it's gone to the ninth house of authority and religion, and it's exalted there. So that's a strength, but then you have Mars aspecting there. So again, you can have this like, breaking with tradition or breaking with convention here. But the activities here are all very open. I mean, the second house, that's something that's going to be obvious and open. The 10th house, obvious and open. 11th house, obvious, obvious and open. So it looks like the sibling is involved with potentially protesting here, is what I'm seeing in public groups and, communities, religious communities, and that sort of thing. So, but overall, pretty positive because at least the grahas are well placed. Then we have on this chart, we have other relationships. So the top chart here is the Saptamsha D7 for children, and the second chart is Dwadashamsha D12 for parents and grandparents. So luckily for both charts, all grahas are well placed. So it's nice so far. I mean, the D9 was like, it could be worse for sure, but there's a lot going on in the D9. But what I'm seeing, most of these, we'll see like the siblings chart, all grahas well placed, children, all grahas well placed, parents, grandparents, all grahas well placed. Um, so as a first pass, um, that's very encouraging that again, what we were saying in the main chart is that things for this moment in time, again, things can always change, but for this moment in time, things are being contained. Um, mostly, right? So again, the D7 at the top here. Um, you can see again, the moon is at the top here. So mind and emotions with children. You have Sun aspecting the moon, and Mars aspecting the mind. Moon here. So we have the two fire planets, leadership planets. Like, how do we lead the mind and emotions through leading through a crisis, right? Like the whole main chart. It's basically kind of another variation of that. Um, so it's kind of similar to the siblings chart because again, there are very public activities here. We have the D10. I mean, the 10th bhava here, the 10th house where Mars is. There might be disruptions with daily activities for these kids. Yeah, I would assume, like, especially, and the kids, like, I don't think they don't have to be like little kids again, like the college kids, I mean, like I was saying, it looks like from the main chart is that, um, college kids are, there's some disruption in higher education because people are protesting or whatever, And then Jupiter here, clubs, group societies, speaking, and Rahu, you know, uh, um, Rahu's here in oration again, speaking. So how do we speak about these things? And again, it's a teaching moment. We have Jupiter here, the teacher, that's aspecting the fifth house of counseling. And then we also have Mars aspecting the fifth house of counseling. So what are we teaching children about leading through crisis? And the thing is, some of these children, again, if they're college age or teenagers or whatever, they're getting into the mix too. And I know that there's, disruptions at work and school. A lot of kids are facing because of different protests or, depending on where they are in the world. But that's also like, it's kind of like some extent, it's disruptive, yes, but to some extent, like, what's the point of all that education? I mean, part of it, philosophically, for some people, believe that university should be, more of a like a trade school, and people gain, very practical skills, and that's potentially very valid. And there are other people who believe, or think that the whole purpose of university is to like think independently and to get involved and like to form, thought leaders. So, and then we see that the lugna here for the subtumsha is a Jupiter, is a dual sign, and then not only is the sign a Jupiterian sign, but it's specifically Sagittarius. Sagittarius in the natural zodiac is the ninth house of higher education, leadership, authority. So through this moment in time, children, young and old, are learning how to lead self and others through a crisis. In terms of spirituality and religion, and education. Yeah. So that's all there. Then the Dwadash D12, parents, grandparents. Well, we see Mars and Jupiter here at the top. Jupiter is Swa here. Mars and Jupiter together, international law. There might be enthusiasm here. It can go either way. Like some people, this is going to be enthusiasm for fighting. This is going to be enthusiasm. Some people are going to be enthusiastic about fighting. Some people are going to be enthusiastic about being, just compassionate. Um, so, and then what else do we have here? Oh, we have, um, so mixed emotions, mixed reactions here with parents and grandparents. Rahu is in the ninth house of leadership, higher education, religious authority, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of effort to communicate because we have not only Mercury here in the ninth house, but we have Jupiter aspecting here. So the two education planets, Jupiter and Mercury, the two, speaking, writing planets here. So there's a lot of effort to communicate. Um, more than with secular groups, with like religious groups. This could be more the like elders of the community, getting together, trying to form a plan because they've been through much more stuff than the children have, potentially. So they're the ones who are kind of, um, yeah, trying to create coalitions of authority to really bring about change rather than just. Sometimes that helps, right? I mean, I don't know. The experiences I've had. I mean, sometimes when students hold their placards up when they protest, sometimes it's helpful. I'm not sure it always is. You really have to reach somehow the people in true authority, and that's usually the older folks here. Typically, there is a parivartana between Saturn and Venus here. Um, So that would bring Venus and Saturn into the eighth house. Saturn is exalted here, and Venus would be Swa here. So there's some, how do we protect our loved ones type energy as the thought process here. And then we have Saturn, Swa with Venus and Moon in the 12th house. So how do we prevent losses of our loved ones? And how do we, help people release all this anxiety? Yeah, and restless. How do we get people to calm down? Crowd control, public management here. And there are going to be, again, very different approaches to this. So there's all this kind of swirling around business in the sixth house from the native chart, who's basically kind of here in the Lugna and then the ninth house here of the Dwada Shamsha. But at least, again, all three planets are well placed. So now let's look at education and career. So then, so far we've looked at relationships. The only one that, even though it wasn't the worst it could be, there's a lot going on at D9, but siblings, parents, grandparents, children overall were, looking better than not. So, okay, so we have at the top here the Siddhamsha, D24 of education. Rahu is not well placed here, which again, disruptions, especially it's in the sixth house of daily activity, daily routine. So there's disruptions there. Wasn't surprising. So turbulent daily schedule disruptions. The other thing is Mars is debilitated in the second house. So, that can be very fiery, unpredictable, possibly destructive speech. This could be and you could see there's a parivartana here between Mars and Moon is in the 11th house of clubs, groups, and society. So this could be, again, all the protesting going on with students. Um, if we're talking collectively, if this is a person's chart, this could be that, a kid's going through a fairly hard time, and they're having difficulty communicating, issues. Could be that the kid is being quite outspoken in groups, like having social problems. Maybe they're not getting along with, it's like, well, mom and dad, moon and sun are there. So in public, it might be the kid is like speaking out, but it could also be like, again, authority figures and stuff like this. Like the kids are having some run-ins with authority figures, it looks like. Um, so again, the Mars, Moon, Parivartan exchange of houses in the 211, inflamed minds, speech groups. There's also a Parivartana, though, between Jupiter and Mercury, the two education planets. So there's definitely positive learning going on here as well. Um, strong education of self, of partnerships, of coalitions. Like, okay, you're upset about a situation, and you can go and we actually at the university I went to undergrad, there was this man. He was a daily fixture there. He would literally stand on a box, like a soapbox, create his own soapbox. And every day he was called the hate man. He would he would just literally just spew very negative remarks at anybody and everybody. Like people would walk by and he'd be like, "I hate you." Yeah, that was his whole thing. And his philosophy was like, you can't really be honest with somebody until you tell them that you hate them. So anyway, that was his philosophy. But I kind of get that, like, you could be that kind of person, and maybe, he affected a lot of change on his own, on his little soapbox. But I think also what's being learned here is that it's more effective, like to really make change, you've got to build some kind of um, a coalition, some sort of collective group energy to really make things happen. And I think what's being learned here. Okay. Then we have the Dashamsha here, D10 career. Jupiter's not well placed. It's also debilitated in the 12th house, so there could be some losses here. Rahu, Mars is Swa, so there's some strength, but it's with Ketu, so there could definitely be disruptions here. We also have Saturn aspecting here, so we have three malefic planets in the 10th house of daily activity. So what I'm seeing here with Ketu, Mars, and Saturn and Rahu, this is technology. This is machines. This is so if we're talking collective energy, this is like gathering together the work to be had right now is gathering together all the kind of military technology and weapons and accoutrement, all that sort of stuff. There might be a loss of manpower. If we're talking about like an individual, like if this is an individual chart, I could see how this is like people are getting laid off. I could see how this could be like people like getting replaced by machines, robots, AI. I mean, the technology stuff that's kind of, coming through these days. It could also be, people going overseas, although um, it's not looking like it's going to be, the greatest journey. There are going to be losses through, like maybe a transfer overseas or something like that. So, Yeah, some disruptions with both education and career you could see here. Okay, so moving on to other aspects of life, we've got income and assets here with these sub-zodiac charts. The Ekadamsha is the D11 that represents income and also public support. And you can see all the grahas are well placed. And they're actually, it's a pretty strong chart. I mean, you can see the Lugnatia here is Jupiter and it's aspecting its own sign. So, yeah. Anyway, the Dasha period graha. So Rahu and Jupiter, um, well placed. And Mars is Swa in its sign in the fifth house. So it's almost like again this protection or I would even say increase of both inanimate and human assets, and also philosophy here. So it's kind of funny. I would have expected, again, sometimes these amshas you can't count on them because they're so finicky based on like an exact birth time and stuff. And if you're right on the cusp of one of the amshas, like you can spin spin one bhava or the other, one way or the other. So, you've got to go back and qualify. Again, if you were looking at somebody's birth chart, but I'm not looking at somebody's birth chart, I'm looking a moment at a time. But I was kind of surprised because, again, Rahu is ambition, it's in the 10th house. Um, Jupiter is with Venus in the 7th house. So Venus and Jupiter represent people in the 7th house of partnership. So it is about building relationships here, but there's tension here because Jupiter is a soul enemy. When you look at amshas, Jupiter is a soul enemy of Venus. Don't confuse that with friends and enemies from the main chart. It's a different concept. So again, if I was looking at this for a person rather than collective energy, I would say, there's actually quite a boost in income. And, again, it can also be public support. And again, Mars in Aries in the fifth house, it's like a hawkish type of, like, let's go get them, type energy here. So, but I would think, well, maybe, let me think about this a little bit. I guess initially I would have thought that there would be a loss of income because, maybe you're stepping away from work, like what we saw in the D10. But this could also potentially be fundraising. And I think that's what it might be. So, again, for the collective situation, I think it's about raising big amounts of cash to support whatever's going on here. That's a de-escalation or escalation, either whichever which way, either which way people hoping it's going to go and want to support it to go with money. Um, but it's also like about, philosophy here. Right? Jupiter aspecting its own sign of Sagittarius, which we mentioned is the natural constellation for the ninth house of higher education and philosophy. Um, but there's tension here. So again, I don't think there are people on both sides of the fence in terms of which way they want things to go. But whichever side they're on, they're still doing the same things. Like they're still getting resources, financial and kind of equipment resources together. Like this is Rahu, Ketu, Saturn in the 10th house, kind of like what we saw in the D10. This could be like, again, like accumulating all the equipment and weapons and, the drones and stuff, right? Drones are a big part of what's going on right now these days. Um, so yeah, and also gathering, like building relationships, like building alliances, like, which side are people going to be on, So all that's going on. So at least for now, that's building. Yeah. So then the Chaturtamsha D4. So this is kind of, maybe this is what I was thinking of in my head before I started looking at this stuff. So Chaturtamsha D4 is more about assets, so things that already exist rather than kind of bringing in. So the Ekadamsha D11 is about things, new resources, new income, new finances and chatra chamsas, stuff that we already own, potentially, or gain or loss of that. So Mars is not well placed. It's in the third house, which creates a karako bhava. So there are problems with, when we have that, we typically have problems with siblings or neighbors. And you can see Mars is the planet representing enemies with K2, so very destructive type energy. We also have Mercury aspecting there. Mercury is debilitated there. So there's a lot of chaotic energy in the third house here. Jupiter's debilitated. So at least Jupiter's in a positive house, but it's debilitated. And it's with Moon. So what I was saying here is that assets are not just tangible assets, like trucks and vehicles and planes and whatever else that goes into that. But I would say a loss of social equity with Jupiter and Moon here, because you also see Venus in the ninth house. And this can also be like, human loss, frankly. I mean, sorry to be so macabre. That's part of, the potential issue here. And also like, some compassion and generosity, but I would say lacking. Jupiter's debilitated and Venus is off in the 12th house, and you can see the dispositor, the lord of the house that Venus is in, is this debilitated Jupiter. So Jupiter and Venus again, kind of like in the main chart, and then what was it, the Navamsha D9 for spouse? Jupiter and Venus are combust, debilitator in the corners. You know, in these charts. Then Rahu is in the ninth house of again authority. We've got this, Swa retrograde Mercury, very strong Mercury. So, but again, that's all like rationality and analysis, and like I could just see like all these advisors, producing charts and charts and charts of data. And how do you sort through all that? I guess that's what the authorities are trying to do to make their decisions about, how to use assets most effectively. So there's ambition there, like material assets, technology, intelligence assets, also, I would say, because of this Mercury here. But there's also this, it's kind of like in the main chart when we had the Mercury, retrograde Mercury aspecting Virgo, and we had K2 there. Now we have Rahu. So again, there's this like, how do I say, it's like, it's not a warm and fuzzy energy here coming from the authorities. It's like a, how do we be the most rational about this and kind of most attached, because it looks like you know um, there's going to be some loss, I guess, and so they're trying to prevent more loss or a greater loss, I guess. So yeah, and then this Mars flare up here, you can see there's some loss here. There's some sudden loss of assets, maybe siblings, neighbors, because again, at least in the Middle East, all these countries that are kind of on red right now, or on the edge right now. I mean, they're all neighbors, right? So you can kind of see it that way. So it does look like, with this Mars flare up, um, uh, there is some loss of assets, but the income, it's like things are building. So it looks like somebody's making out here, I mean, frankly, with this income and public support and all this. So that was, I guess, a little bit surprising to see, but maybe I shouldn't be surprised by it. But it is what it is. So. Okay, then we have health here. So these are three amshas to look at health. The top one is the Tajik Shashtamsha D6 for acute issues. The second one is Tajik Ashtamamsha for D8 for chronic issues. And the third one's the Bamsha D27 for strength and resilience overall. So luckily, again, this is kind of going with like the siblings chart and the children's chart and grandparents and that sort of thing, is that all the grahas in all three of these health charts are well placed. So that again signals to me that at least for the time being, despite the tension and potential escalation here, is that things at this moment in time are still contained. Um, There are issues though, so it's not like they're, and we'll talk about that. So, let's start at the top here, the D6 acute issues here. So, all grahas are well placed. You can see Jupiter, Mars, Rahu, all in positive houses. But you can see Mars and Rahu are forming both, or both forming a Sankhya yoga, which is a negative yoga. It will bring both of these planets down in terms of what they produce for the period in which they're active. So, and they're both in the 5-9 houses. So, the fifth house, GI, children, and the ninth house, authority. So, the destabilization we were seeing in both of those houses from the native chart is here as well. So, overall, positive or decent, but maybe not fantastic. Okay, when you add in those nuances of the planets. And then Mars is in the fifth house, aspecting the eighth house, where it's going to be very active and strong. So that's a deep psychology here. So there's this, again, Mars is a flare up here, literally as a planet, but also as a, what is it, antara here, a sub period. So you can see, again, kind of a strong, military push in the deep psychology. The other thing is Mars is aspecting its own sign in the 11th house of public groups and societies and, that sort of thing. So there's on the front of the mind, a flare up here, and the deep psychology of flare up here, and then in public, there's a flare up here. Again, it's not going to be, still going to be okay, but it's not going to be great. Okay, that's what I'm saying. Then we have the Tajik Ashtamamsha. So this is, I might need to correct that. Anyway, sorry. The D8, so chronic issues here. So again, Mars, Jupiter, Rahu, all in positive houses. However, Jupiter and Venus are in a Shubh Sankhya Yoga now because of their placement. That's going to pull them up. So actually, this was helpful, or I think encouraging to me, because that means that Jupiter looks good, decent. It's in a positive house, but it's actually going to be even better because of this Shubh Sankhya Yoga that it's in with Venus. So actually, Jupiter's, you can put a little gold star next to Jupiter. Again, not perfect, but a little bit better than just the way it is on its own, in a positive house. So that, since we're talking about chronic issues here, over the long haul, right? Any kind of GI issues here or issues with children, potentially will be better in terms of long-term effects. But it's also a mixed bag because Jupiter is now forming a karako bhava nashaya. When Jupiter is in the fifth house, Jupiter represents children, and the fifth house represents children. When you have the planet representing, a person in the constellation or house, excuse me, not constellation, house representing same person, you can get almost too much energy here. So there may be some long-term issues here. Probably depends on the child. Luckily, Jupiter is aspecting Cancer in the Lugna here, where Jupiter is exalted. So I think there's mostly some protection here. It's going to be a bit of a mixed bag, I think, with children overall, mostly on the at least decent side. Some will be positive, um, some not. But overall, um, the other thing is a Lugnatia. Lugnatia here is the moon. The ruling planet of the chart has gone to the 12th house of losses. So there's a tendency here, again, if we're talking about a person, one person rather than a collective, there's a tendency here for the mind and emotions, there losses and due to the mind and emotions, and loss of sleep, insomnia again, as in the first chart. Then the Bhamsha D27, strength and resilience. Again, overall, graha is well placed. So first pass, things are good. However, you have this exalted Mars again in the fifth house of uh, counseling and intellect here. Children. It's in a Pop Sankhya Yoga with Saturn in the ninth house. So again, we keep seeing planets in the fifth house here of children, of and GI issues. So again, overall, it could be much worse, but there's definitely a flare up here. Um, yeah. What else? So authority. Look at my notes here. Um, Mars is in a Pop Sankhya Yoga. So even though Mars is exalted here, the Pop Sankhya Yoga that Mars is in with Saturn, it's going to bring down this Mars a bit. The other thing is that Mars is here with two different natural malefics. So this is a lot here. Overall, there's strength and resilience, but this is a lot of potential burden here that somebody is dealing with, or again, collectively we're dealing with. What else? And Jupiter is in the ninth house of authority. Jupiter is in a Mishra Sankhya Yoga. So, in a Mishra Sankhya, that's a mixed Sankhya Yoga. It's going to pull this Jupiter down a bit, even though it's in a positive house. So, still above, still decent, but not ideal, not fantastic. Um, and then we have Saturn here. So, there's, the authorities are kind of more slow and calculating. Um, they're thinking long-term picture. They're probably not thinking of so much of immediate potential fallouts from the situation. Let's see, Mars aspecting its own sign. Oh, okay. So wait, let me back up here. Okay, Mars aspecting its own sign of in the eighth house. That's again another fiery energy coming from both the top part of the intellect and mind, and then the deeper mind. Um, Mars is also aspecting the 11th house, where it's debilitated. So we've got, potentially a lot of long-term anger here coming from the eighth house, potentially a loss of relationships, and, alliances with groups, because in order to form some groups, you might have to let go of others because everybody's taking sides right now. So that's probably part of what's stressing this person out. The Lignatia, kind of like in the D8, the Lignatia is going to the 12th house of losses again. So again, the mind tends to um, overall in decisions, there can be a lot of losses. Like somebody just thinks constantly about this stuff and loses sleep, and um, it might be somebody who loses, their rationality, or they need to retreat in order to, recover a bit. Um, that's potentially what's going on here. Mars and K2 Sun in the fifth house. I mean, that's a lot of fire energy again. And twists and turns, unusual leadership. Again, the Sun and Mars are both leadership planets. Um, yeah, it's a very hawkish type position, and again, affecting the 8th house of deep psychology and 11th house of clubs, groups, and societies. So, yeah, again, overall, we would say good. It could be a lot worse. I mean, at least these aren't in negative houses. Um, But even though they're in positive houses, for the most part, there's also some drag here, except for this Shubh Sankhya Yoga between Jupiter and Venus and the D8. So, yeah. Okay, and then finally, the last couple amshas I looked at are related to spirituality and worship. The top chart here is the Panchamsha D5 for native, kind of innate spirituality. And the second chart is the Vimshamsha D20 for more formal worship, like more of a more formal kind of religious community, that sort of thing. So in the D5, Rahu is not well placed. It's in the third house here. Again, neighbors and writing, nonverbal communication. The Lugnatia has gone to the ninth house of, religion, authority. It's with K2. It is aspecting its own sign, the Lugna. So there's strength to this. But I could see that there's like, I want to say like, religious community is not very stable. Neighbors, siblings, not very stable. Like, or maybe foreign, that could be as well. It could also be that, I would say like studying literature seems to be important. Again, if this is a person, I would say because we have Mercury and Jupiter both in and aspecting the ninth house of higher education. So I think, again, if this is somebody's chart and their own kind of own brand of personal spirituality, it involves a lot of uh, studying of literature and like sacred texts and stuff like that. It might also be like chanting, like mantras or singing religious songs and that sort of thing. Is what I'm seeing here. Mars is in the 12th house of loss and expenditures. We have Saturn on there. We have Moon on there. So we have this like a lot of pressure again on the mind and emotions. And it might be that temporarily during this Mars Antara subperiod, this person would prefer to practice in isolated places, um, uh, rather than kind of openly, to really get in tune. It's not just kind of because, again, the things going on in the Middle East, there's also religious uh, alliances involved. And so it might be that uh, part of the thing, part of the situation calls for potentially showing up in public spaces and showing oneself aligned with a particular group, or religious or secular, or what have you. But it seems like there's some effort here too to tune in on one's own in isolated places rather than making ultimate. So there's like how would I say there's a differentiation between showing support of religious groups publicly versus um, the deeper spiritual practice. That's what I'm saying here. Yeah, and then the Vimshamsha D20 worship. So all the grahas are well placed, which again, and you see where they are. It's like Jupiter's in the 11th house of clubs, groups, and society, a very public place, open place. Rahu's in the 10th house of daily activities, activities we do during the daylight hours. And then Mars is in the ninth house of authority, religious, or spiritual community. So you can see that the D20 of formal worship is much stronger and is very public and open. And that's what, again, this is people showing up for different groups and showing their support. And that's part of what's going on. And then especially Mars here in that period, we're going to get, some inflammatory, comments here, through higher groups of higher education and religious, but the secular groups are also, on board here. So this is why people are like showing up, whereas before they might have been more private. Now they're kind of, showing up in numbers and, to show support and also potentially force. Um, the other thing is that places are like really full here. Like this is a very, like Saturn is Swan, the third house. Venus is exalted in the fourth house. So Saturn Swan, even though we're not looking at these planets specifically because of the current Dasha period, just overall, like there's a lot of strength, like siblings, very strong, home, very strong, ninth house, and then, Ninth house is active, 11th house active. Yeah, so there's a lot of like, yeah, again, just public support of more formal worship right now rather than just relying on personal innate spirituality. It's a different kind of thing because, again, the D5, again, if this is somebody who is very into studying literature and chanting or singing or speaking about religion, um, that is kind of a different, it's more introverted. It's the natural spiritual, native spirituality is more introverted than what's being called for, I think, in this moment. So, yeah. Okay, so there you have it. Mm. So, as always, I want to thank you for your time. I always appreciate you coming by and listening to one of my talks. Again, all of my teaching videos on the subject of Vedic astrology are my concepts playlists. Also, you can check out the different playlists, like the houses playlist and the planets playlist, to get more information on those subjects. And then I also just published a archive of birth charts if you're looking for a birth chart that you want to go through, at least up until recently. So I just published that a week or two ago. So that video will help you find different birth charts and where they are in other videos. I also offer individual birth chart readings. I do them live on Zoom, and I also offer recorded video readings. If you're interested and want more info, you can email heartlightastro@yahoo.com. And then I have another YouTube channel on natural medicine that covers other Vedic arts such as Ayurveda and yoga, as well as other paradigms in natural medicine such as homeopathy and naturopathic medicine. And the name of that channel is called Nature Source Care. So that's out there too, if that's interesting to you. So, as always, I hope that you found this video interesting, useful, and helpful to you as you learn to navigate the energy cycles of your own life. So, until the next one, take care. Namaste.